So, good morning, everyone. The meeting will begin right at 8 o'clock.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is 8 o'clock, and we're going to kick this thing off. I'm going to first start off by saying I appreciate the working relationship that the chair lady and I have, and look forward to continuing to working with her.
You did not give me this box of candy, but I'll tell you later you did.
Happy Valentine's Day, Madam Chair. But it has been a great opportunity for us to work together on all things related to the committees that we have the privilege to chair. And so we thought it important. I know the chair lady has been doing these updates. We discussed the opportunity of us working together on some of these going forward. And that's the purpose of the joint meeting this morning. I will go into some more comments here in a few minutes, but I'm going to turn it over to the chair lady, and you can grab that one, and let her get us going. So, Madam Chairman.
Good morning again, everyone. We normally open our meeting with a prayer, so our Secretary of our Natural Resources Committee on the House side will open our meeting with a prayer. Representative Don Hogan.
Thank you, Chairman Smith. As we reflect upon what we're doing up here, I just pray for guidance. Oh Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for our constituents back home. Thank you for those individuals who are suffering around the state. And we pray we do the right thing on this committee. In Christ's name we pray, amen.
Amen.
Amen. You want to make any other comments?
There's one logistical type thing I have to make. So we've heard the battle back and forth between the House and Senate on rules and appropriations. The House Rules Committee meets here at 9 o'clock. So we need to vacate this room before then. So I ask if our audience will please be considerate of all of our legislators, give them an opportunity to leave, and then just meet with them outside. So we don't want the Rules Committee to be upset with us because we all might have bills coming before them. So thank you for your consideration.
Exactly. I agree. I concur. Well, thank you, Madam Chairman. We'll go ahead and get this thing started. I just kind of a few opening comments from me. Again, I want to thank the chair lady for her work on many, many issues, including the one that we're going to be discussing this morning. And I think it's important to note that this is a oversight in a hearing this morning. Well, that's the purpose of the meeting. We've asked the Environmental Protection Division and the director to come and others to give us up to date on what's going on, and that's what this hearing is about. Obviously, this morning we will not be taking any testimony. That's not the purpose of this meeting. Testimony will be taken in committee hearings whenever we have legislation that may be taken up before the committees. That's normally when we have public comment and public testimony. So we've been discussing the issue that we're going to be discussing this morning for a number of years, and the purpose of this hearing is just to give an update to the members of the committees on what's going on in regards to this issue, and that way we can be informed as we move forward in regards to whatever we may take up legislatively. So with that said, I am going to turn it over to the director of the EPD, Mr. Rick Dunn, and there we go. It's all yours, sir.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Overview and introduce some staff, and I'll do that kind of first, and then I'll provide an update on coal ash disposal. We have a lot of material to cover. I've got about 20 minutes, so I'm going to dive right in if that's okay. First, a little about EPD. EPD is the state agency that's charged with protecting Georgia's air, land, and water resources through the authority granted by a variety of state and federal environmental statutes. We implement about 24 state environmental laws. As well, we have full permitting and enforcement authority for all major federal environmental laws, including the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Water Act, as well as RCRA, the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, which is the federal law dealing with solid waste and hazardous waste. Most of our functions are regulatory. In other words, we establish and enforce rules to protect human health and environmental quality. We do have some other activities. We administer both of the trust funds, the Hazardous Waste Trust Fund and the Solid Waste Trust Funds. We do some licensing of some professionals. We maintain an emergency response team with the capacity to respond to the releases of hazardous materials on a 24/7 statewide basis. And we also operate a laboratory capable of analyzing air, water, and land samples to protect human health and safety and to ensure compliance with environmental regulations. Slide 3 that I have here is kind of a snapshot of agency staff and locations. EPD has 710 employees. We are largely organized by environmental media or branches. It's important to note, I think, that almost all of our employees are in a STEM-related field. We largely employ environmental specialists, engineers, geologists, lab scientists, and modelers. Let me just go through each branch and office and give a brief highlight. Starting first with our air branch. Air Branch has 144 employees. They are located at the Tradeport Office Park, which is down near the airport. This is the branch that handles air quality permits for industry and administers the vehicle emissions program for the 13-county metro area. I'm going to ask Karen Hayes, who's in the audience, to stand up, who is the chief of the Air Branch. Karen is an engineer, and she has on yellow. She's a Georgia Tech graduate and has been at EPD for 20 years. Our land branch, 175 employees, largely split between the Twin Towers here on Capitol Hill, as well as staff down at the Tradeport. It is the branch that regulates solid waste, including the scrap tire program, hazardous waste cleanup programs, and underground storage tank. The land branch is led by Chuck Mueller, who's right here. Chuck is a Texan, has 26 years experience in environmental policy and management, the last 13 here at EPD. Water branch, 176 employees, kind of spread out, located at the Twin Towers. They have some staff at the Ag Building across the street and have agriculture water permitting offices down in Tifton and Dawson, Georgia. Dawson down in Terrell County office down there. Jack Capp, where's Jack? Jack is the water branch chief. He is also a Georgia Tech engineer by way of Illinois and has been at EPD for the last 26 years. We also maintain 7 field offices in Albany, Athens, Atlanta, Augusta, Brunswick, Cartersville, and Macon. The district offices work across all media types and handle complaint investigation, emergency response, inspections, and compliance activities. District offices have a staff of 95 and is led by Jim Cooley, who is here. Yeah, Jim is here. Jim has spent the last 16 years at EPD. He's head of our district operations. I mentioned our lab. Our lab is located in Peachtree Corners, 74 staff, and we have administration consisting of 46 staff. Administration is our finance, HR, legal, IT, and other enterprise functions. And let me take this second to introduce Lauren Curry, who's the Deputy Director of EPD. Both Lauren and I have worked, each of us has worked in state government for over 15 years in a variety of assignments, and we both joined EPD together about 3 years ago. I've included a number of slides in your handouts that detail what our organization does and some metrics that give an idea of our scope of work. I'm not going to go into a full discussion. I'm going to dive right into coal ash, but that's there for your review, and we'll be happy offline of this hearing to answer any questions you may have. I'm going to jump all the way to slide 15, which is the focus of this oversight hearing, which is EPD's regulation of the disposal of coal combustion residuals, also called CCR, also called coal ash. This is going to be a team effort. I'm going to start off with some background and history, and I'm going to have Chuck and Jack talk about their respective areas. CCR is the byproduct generated from the combustion of coal. For purposes of our regulation, it's generated from the combustion of coal in the generation of electricity. CCR is the largest waste stream in the United States, largest industrial waste stream in the United States, and ash that has not recycled has been historically stored in unlined surface impoundments, also called ash ponds, or less common at dry on-site industrial landfills. Prior to 2015, CCR was not subject to any specific standards for waste management. After the failures of surface impoundments in North Carolina and Tennessee had a failure in 2008, the Dan River plant had a failure in 2014, EPA, United States EPA at the federal level, issued new regulations governing the disposal of CCR at electricity generating facilities. Now I want to start off by noting that EPA regulated CCR as a solid waste. It regulated as a solid waste under RCRA Subtitle D, not as a hazardous waste under RCRA Subtitle C. What the EPA regulations do is they set national minimum criteria to address risk from groundwater contamination and potential structural failures. The criteria for these CCR storage units in the rule include specific location requirements, design requirements, and operation requirements. The criteria also included requirements related to the results from groundwater monitoring. The CCR disposal units, whether they're surface impoundments or whether they are on-site landfills, those surface impoundments that cannot meet the criteria established in the federal rule would be forced to either close or be retrofitted. About a year later, after the federal rule was passed in the fall of 2016, EPD amended its rules to incorporate and expand upon the federal regulations. One weakness we saw in the federal rule was that it was self-executing. In other words, it relied upon electric utilities to follow the requirements and relied upon citizen suits for enforcement. The first big thing the state rule did was it explicitly allowed Georgia EPD to permit, monitor, and enforce the CCR regulations. The Georgia rule also introduced additional design, operation, and groundwater monitoring requirements upon municipal solid waste landfills that accepted coal ash. The federal rule only dealt with coal ash disposal at power generating facilities. We expanded that to include requirements for municipal solid waste landfills that were accepting some of this ash. I'm going to skip the next two slides, which deal with changes at the federal level for purposes of time, and kind of skip to the bottom line, which is here on slide 19. Under both the state and federal rules, all 30 ash ponds in Georgia must cease accepting waste and close. Most impoundments in Georgia must cease accepting waste in April of this year. There's an extension to October 2020 for Plant Shearer in Juliet, Georgia, just outside of Macon, and they must complete closure of these surface impoundments or ash ponds within 5 years, although extensions to that requirement are available. The rule provides two options for closure. One is clean closure or complete removal of the ash from the unit. This is where the ash is removed and groundwater monitoring does not exceed applicable standards. Or the second option is closure with waste in place. The storage unit under this option must be modified to ensure that it meets the performance standards designated to control potential post-closure releases and comply with the rule's post-closure care requirements. Both methods of closing require surface impoundments or coal ash ponds to be dewatered or have the pond water removed. The water removed from the ash ponds must be treated and discharged. To make things a little more complicated, the CCR rule does not deal with dewatering. Dewatering falls under the existing authority of the Clean Water Act and the Georgia Water Quality Control Act. The CCR just deals with the disposal unit. To make things complicated, the Clean Water Act, Georgia Water Quality Control Act deals with the dewatering of the pond. The elimination of ash ponds as a storage method also means that the coal-fired units must convert to dry ash handling, and they must install new wastewater treatment systems to handle the non-CCR industrial wastewater that previously utilized the ash ponds. With this as kind of a background, I'm going to ask Jack Kapp to come up and provide an update on the dewatering process, and he'll be followed by Chuck Mueller to provide an update on the permitting of CCR units at electric utilities and the CCR management plans for municipal solid waste landfills that are accepting some of the dewatered ash. So Jack and Chuck are going to speak. I believe they're going to be followed by some other speakers, and then we'll be available for questions. Thank you. Jack? There's a clicker there.
Thank you and good morning. As the director said, I'm just going to give a very quick update as to the dewatering process. As the director mentioned, it is a collaboration between the Land Protection Branch and the Watershed Protection Branch as it pertains to jurisdiction of these issues. Georgia Power's got 29 ash ponds located at 11 facilities that historically burned coal at these plants. 5 of these plants are still in operation as we speak today, burning coal, and they are listed there on the slide. 2 of those have been targeted for retirement pending some additional PSC approvals. But we are in the process of permanently closing all of these ash ponds, which means they will have to be dewatered. And then the facilities that remain in operation, which would be Plant Bowen in Bartow County, Plant Share in Monroe County, Plant Wansley in Carroll County, those facilities will be converted to handle ash in a dry fashion instead of wet. From a water quality standpoint, this is very good for two particular reasons. Number one, once these ponds are dewatered, it will permanently eliminate that as a point source discharge to our waters. It'll be gone forever, and so that's a good thing. And then the second thing is we've seen historically, and unfortunately we've seen in Tennessee and North Carolina, it eliminates the risk of there being some catastrophic event. And so those are really good things that are going on. As we're managing this, we are requiring Georgia Power to submit a plan to us for how they plan to treat the water in the ponds and then discharge that water so that they can dewater all of these ponds. We've established a web page where those plans are being posted when they are approved, so the public knows what is going on. So far, we've approved 5 plans. For 3 of those 5 plans, active dewatering operations are underway. In addition to that, we recently received notice that a 4th facility, Plant Branch, is planning to commence dewatering soon. And so the basic approach that we're doing with these is we're requiring them to sample at their effluent point about 24 constituents, and most of those are on a weekly basis. Some of those are on a much more frequent basis than that. And in addition to that, we are monitoring in-stream, both upstream and downstream of the discharge point to ensure water quality is protected. So as I mentioned, we've got 3 of those facilities that are actively dewatering, so that data is coming in. Our staff is reviewing that data and comparing them to water quality standards, and so far what we're seeing is that the water quality is being protected. We did recently get a plan for another plant, Plant McIntosh, that they are anticipating needing to commence dewatering soon. And so that plan is under review. Once it gets approved, it will be posted on the webpage with the other ones. And then while all of this is ongoing, we are in the process of renewing their NPDES permits. These are 5-year permits. And so as we renew that permit, we are incorporating the requirements of the dewatering plan as enforceable requirements in their NPDES permit. And so that concludes what I had to say this morning, and then I'll be available for questions. Thank you.
Morning. So the land branch is responsible for a number of areas, in particular the review and approval of solid waste, of the coal ash management plans affiliated with existing municipal solid waste landfills. And we're also in the process of reviewing all of the applications we've got to permit the activities associated with the coal ash units at the existing power plants. We've assembled a team. Many of these are helping in addition to their regular duties to handle this workload. And so we have about 7 engineers and geologists working on these applications at this time. The CCR management plans, which are specific to existing solid waste landfills, those that were receiving coal ash and wanted to continue to receive coal ash were required to submit a plan to us by May of 2017. This was done through a minor modification to their existing permits, incorporated into the design and operation plans. Our staff reviewed those to look at the amount of waste that they anticipated to receive, where the waste would be placed in the landfill. There were provisions for dust control and an analysis of the compatibility with the existing waste that was in the landfill already, as well as upgrading the monitoring requirements to ensure protection of the groundwater around the plant. We received 6 of those. and approved them. In order for these facilities to continue to receive coal ash at their landfills, they're required to submit us with an annual report. This annual report has to be reviewed and approved by our staff, and in order for them to continue going forward with the receipt of coal ash there. And we take a look at the amount of CCR that they've received, ensure that it complies with their plan that they had submitted to us as a permit revision, where it's being placed, and what the results are of their monitoring so far. As I mentioned, we have 6 that have submitted and continue to report, and those are at the website, on our website at that location. The big workload right now is to begin the review and analysis of the applications we've gotten from all of the facilities to permit their operations with regards to closing their surface impoundments, or in some cases continue to operate some of their landfills. These permits were required to be submitted by November of this past year. We received over 30 applications, and our team is beginning to review those. We're taking a look again, ensuring that they meet all of the criteria that are spelled out in the federal and state rules to ensure that the operations are done properly and meet all the environmental requirements, whether it is to close in place or remove the ash. We're also looking at the monitoring plans that they have provided us for groundwater and surface water around these facilities to ensure that they are substantial and protective, and that they also have a process for how they will begin to assess and evaluate any additional corrective actions should those monitoring results begin to show levels above our standards. These applications have come on in. We've prioritized them. Like I said, there's over 30, 29 of them are associated with Georgia Power. One of them was with Crisp County Power Authority. Of those, they represent approximately 42 units. 30 of those 42 are surface impoundments, and all of those will be closed as a part of this process. As we review the applications, our engineers will be reviewing them, as I said, for the technical details to ensure that they are sound permitting instruments, and we will be recommending to the director, based upon our review, the proper course of action. So far, 20 of those that we have received are proposing to close their ash ponds by removal, and 10 are proposing to close by in place. As we review these, we will be looking at the rules and regulations to ensure that the performance standards are being met and that they are adequately protective. If they're not, we will either request the applicant to upgrade, or we will propose that they use another method of closure. We do have 12 landfill applications. 5 of these landfills around the state located on will be used in the future to take some of that ash that is being removed. Of the rest of those will either be closed in place or closed by removal as well. Again, that's my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer questions after we're done.
So let me just wrap it up, kind of big picture. We talked a little bit about the federal rule and the state rule. What we've got here is kind of 3 processes. The first one is the CCR units at on these electricity generating sites. Under the state rule, they will be permitted. The closure process will be permitted and overseen by EPD. That's what Chuck talked about there. We have, for the surface impoundments, we have the dewatering process, which is governed by the Clean Water Act and the Georgia Water Quality Control Act. And then for municipal solid waste landfills that are accepting this ash that is dug out of these ponds and landfills, we talked about our state rules require CCR management plans and annual reports about that. So that's kind of the regulatory scheme, and that's the extent of our presentation. So, thank you.
Thank you, Director. We're going to hold questions till the end. We're going to go ahead and do all the presentations. So if you have questions specific to EPD, I would encourage you to write that down to remind you. But that way we can make sure we get through all the presentations first, and then we'll open up the floor for questions. So at this time, we're going to turn it over to those that are doing the work that you were just heard about from EPD. And this morning, we're going to hear from the General Manager of Environmental Affairs from Georgia Power, Mr. Aaron Mitchell. I'm just going to go ahead and introduce everybody, if that's okay. We're going to hear from the Vice President of Environmental Affairs at Oglethorpe Power, Ms. Tony Presnell. Did I say that right? Or is that close enough? All right. If I butchered it, it's because I'm South Georgia redneck. I don't speak English. I speak redneck. And last is the Senior Vice President, Chief Operating Officer at MEAG, Mr. Steve Jackson. So I'm going to turn it over to y'all, and the floor is yours.
Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity, members of the committee, to come and update you on our progress. I think EPD covered very well the regulations that we're under. As Director Dunn did, I've included additional information that we won't have time to cover, so I'll try to be expeditious with our time. The only couple things that I would mention in addition, or just to reiterate what Director Dunn covered, we are regulated, Georgia Power is regulated for closure of our ash ponds by two regulations, our federal regulation and as well the state regulation. We are complying with both. In some cases, it requires us to keep separate sets of compliance documents. Two key points. The federal rule regulates about half of our ash ponds. Georgia EPD's rule is more stringent in a couple of facets in that it regulates all of our ash ponds and landfills on Georgia Power property, as well as Mr. Mueller indicated and the Director, other landfills that receive coal ash in the state. Specifically, the state rule requires a couple of key things: regulation of all of those ash ponds and a comprehensive permitting program, which Mr. Mueller described. So before I get into the progress and to maybe enumerate from the regulated entity side of how we're going through progress, I just want to remind and maybe inform some new committee members, if I may, on our strategy that was mentioned during EPD. So back in 2015, when the federal CCR rule came out, Georgia Power was among the first in the industry to announce that we would cease use of all of our ash ponds. The regulations prescribe steps that you have to go through to get to that point. We elected to move on from the traditional handling of ash in ash ponds, install new equipment, and I'll give you an update on that progress. Since that time, we've continued to provide updates, and I'll overview some of those as well. Specifically, of the 29 ponds, we will remove 29, of the 29 ponds, we will remove 19 of those ponds. We'll excavate entirely the ash from those ponds. We identified on a very site-specific basis and a pond-to-pond basis, leveraging third-party engineers and geologists to determine what is the best plan of action to close those ponds. Those 19 that are being removed are the ponds that are closest to our lakes and rivers and water bodies around the state. The 10 that will be closed in place are the ponds that are further from the water bodies, and we are not simply closing in place in the traditional method. We're using advanced engineering methods, as we've termed, additional measures that are to be employed and designed site-specifically from pond to pond to ensure both the effectiveness of that closure and that it meets the requirements of the permit and both regulations, as well as protection of groundwater at those sites now and into the future. In addition, a couple of points that I wanted to key in on is that we will, and I'll discuss it in a minute on dewatering, we're installing new water treatment systems for the dewatering, as well as treatment systems to replace the treatment function of those ponds. And finally, we reuse more than 60% of the ash that's produced from our active coal-fired power plants. That's up from years past. At some facilities, it is greater than 90%. We intend to take that approach over 2 ash ponds. And in fact, recently with the Public Service Commission in January, we filed documents that announced, to my knowledge, what would be the first of its kind in a utility-operated ash beneficial reuse research center to be located at a Georgia Power facility in concert and in partnership with the Electric Power Research Institute to do 2 things: study the beneficial reuse products and availability to grow the reuse of ash in that market. And secondly, to study technology, allow vendors to come in and test and perfect the technology that it would take to condition the ash from the ash ponds to then reuse. We're proud of that and look forward to the benefits that will bring to us. As far as progress, quickly, we've installed equipment for both dry handling and wastewater treatment. We've spent hundreds of millions of dollars over the last 3 years, and we're nearing completion of that. In a short couple of months, we will cease to place ash in ash ponds forever. Those plants will be handling ash dry. It'll increase the amount of ash out of those operating plants that is available to be reused. If that's not an option, we will store that in permitted lined landfills. In addition, the water treatment facilities are nearing completion. Those will replace the function of the ash pond to treat the wastewater from those active power plants. In addition, 29 permit applications went in from Georgia Power. Those include thousands of pages of detailed information on each and every pond and landfill that we have, including the design, the engineering design, the construction methods, how we will monitor and report, and then finally the post-closure care, which is required at least for 30 years after we close these ponds. We look forward to those permits being evaluated and issued by EPD so that we can increase and move forward with the closure of the remainder of our ponds. Closure progress, I've summarized here on the slide. Approximately 50% of our ponds have some sort of active closure, ongoing closure construction. 5 of the ponds have been completely excavated. The remainder of those 14, some are very near months away from completing construction. Others are in the midst of that construction. Our construction program in total, the large majority of that activity is about a 15-year process. And then finally, we've talked about our groundwater monitoring for a number of years. We've included data and continue to on our website. We have approximately 500 groundwater monitoring wells around our ash ponds and landfills. In addition, we've installed more wells than what is required by either federal or state regulations for one purpose: to ensure that water quality is being protected and that we are not impacting our neighbors. And because of that additional monitoring data and based on what we've reviewed, I can stand and say that we are not impacting our neighbors' water quality or endangering drinking water off of our sites. I'll touch briefly on dewatering. We operate under dewatering plans approved by Georgia EPD. A little bit on the technical aspect, we've hired third-party firms to design, install, and operate these treatment systems. I've included a picture in the top right of an actual treatment system that is located at Plant Branch. The schematic down on the bottom right is an illustration of how that treatment system works. That's available on our website as well. A couple of key points. Mr. Capp covered the requirements that we will sample weekly, that discharge, as well as biweekly upstream and downstream of the receiving water body. EPD evaluates that data. One additional key point is that there is continuous monitoring on these treatment systems, such that if at any time any parameter set to monitor the operational effectiveness of these treatment systems is out of spec, the system itself shuts down automatically until the operator assures that the system is operating properly, and then we put it back in service. That's something that's not required, but some additional steps that we wanted to take to ensure ourselves as well as our neighbors that we're operating these systems effectively. Finally, we've elected to do all third-party collection of samples, analyses by accredited laboratories, and review of the data that is being provided to EPD. Okay, finally, I'd just like to wrap up with basically a summary of our communication. So since 2015, we've been very open about our plans. Each time we've had an update, we've issued either a press release, updated our website, spoken to EPD in advance. We appreciate the pleasure to update these committees and our neighbors. And we have learned some things and done some things differently as we presented to the House Committee over the past couple of years. The committee's interest, the members' interest, the questions, and some other requests that have been made, for instance, for EPD to publish additional things on their website, we have also adopted. In addition, we've responded to questions from our community, our neighbors, and our community leaders. Specifically, I wanted to point out that, I'll give an example. We've hosted numerous people at our sites, local community leaders, some folks in this room, legislators, this committee, as well as media at our sites. Recently in December, we announced we were nearing dewatering readiness at Plant Branch. We invited the local community leadership, a few members that are here in attendance today, and the leadership from Putnam and Baldwin counties to come out, hear a presentation about how it works, as well as tour the system itself and answer questions. We also hosted media out there. The reason we're doing this is because we want people to understand and have their questions answered, you as leaders to be able to respond to the people that you represent, and our community and neighbors to understand what's going on. That is something that we're committed to continue going forward. We have numerous information on our website detailed here, and we continue to grow that information as we go forward. In closing, I would like to say that we are committed to continuing the process that I just described on communications, hosting people, the pleasure of updating this committee going forward throughout all of our ash pond closure process. And we're confident that the plan and strategy that we've put together both meets and exceeds the requirements of the rules that we're following. Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, if at your pleasure, I'd like to yield the rest of my time to our co-owners. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. As we, some may know, that we co-own some facilities. We operate on behalf of the joint owners at Plant, Share, and Wansley. The ownership percentage is here, and we execute on their behalf. So, Ms. Presnell.
Ms. Presnell.
Thank you very much. As you can see on the slide, Oglethorpe Power actually owns 60% of units 1 and 2 at Share and 30% of the Wansley facility. So we are deeply involved. Although Georgia Power is really the face that most people see regarding CCR, and they act as our agent, we are involved in the entire process. And Aaron and I talk regularly. We both have each other on speed dial, I believe, but we stay involved in this as well. It's a team effort. And I also do appreciate the committee allowing us to be able to inform the public and the committee on the work that is being done. Our goal is to protect the environment, and I believe that the work that we are doing with Georgia Power and MEAG is doing just that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for this opportunity. Just for those of you that are not familiar with MEAG, we serve 49 communities in the state of Georgia. They have electric distribution systems. They provide the elite retail electric service, some of them large, such as Noonan, Georgia, others small like Quitman, Georgia. So we serve a variety of small and large cities around the state at the wholesale power level. As Aaron mentioned, we do have ownership in Plant Wansley and Plant Scherer, and these are very important facilities to the MEAG communities. We have that ownership on behalf of these communities, and they're important resources for us, providing reliable capacity to the grid, and of course, diversity and fuel used for energy supply. As Aaron mentioned, not only we're in compliance with these rules, these units are in compliance with all the environmental rules, and as mentioned, we work with Oglethorpe and Georgia Power in particular to make sure those units stay in compliance and that they will be in compliance with other future rules. And we appreciate EPD's role in helping providing clarity on the path to being in compliance. So we think they have an important role, and we appreciate their efforts. Do recognize that there's a cost burden associated with these rules, and because we are a not-for-profit entity, that those costs fall directly onto the citizens in the 49 communities that we serve. So they accept that burden as we accept the responsibility for meeting compliance. But we appreciate the opportunity to provide the committee that feedback and the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you all. We appreciate the information both from you and as well as our agency. And at this time, I guess just kind of be prepared. We got about 5 minutes or so for questions because we do need to slip out of here so the House Rules Committee can begin getting set up for their meeting at 9 a.m. With that said, I'm going to kick it off really quick, and this may be more to the director, and if you want to follow up, feel free to do so. But based on your testimony, I just want to make sure that I'm clear, and I think it makes sure that the committee is clear, that we understand the level of stringency of the regulations that you enforce. What I understood to be said was that the Obama EPA regulations that were put in place in 2015, correct? That our state EPD regs are more stringent than the Obama EPA era regulations. Is that a correct statement?
Correct. The state regulations, as Aaron mentioned, covers all ash ponds. The federal regulations did not. Our regulations bring in municipal solid waste landfills, which was not something covered by the federal rule. And those are some of the major. Oh, the third big distinction is, at least as initially conceived under the 2015 regulations, there was no EPA enforcement authority, no EPD enforcement authority. Our rules instituted a permit program to allow us to oversee, monitor, and enforce the CCR regulations.
Thank you. Really quick, just before you slip off, I know you said that there were some failure issues in North Carolina and Tennessee.
Correct.
Is that correct? Just for our own committee's purposes, you didn't mention Georgia. I guess my question is, have we had any issues in our state up to this point?
With regards to the coal ash ponds, no catastrophic failures like we saw in Kingston and Dan's River. I'm not aware, short of catastrophic failure, I'm not aware of any releases from these ponds since I've been in EPD that violates EPD water quality control or Georgia water quality control standards, so I'm not aware of that. But just let me emphasize Jack's point. The rules that require these surface impoundments to close, they're expensive, a lot of work, dewatering, alternative wastewater treatment systems, the ash must be moved to line landfills. The ash that's removed must be removed to line landfills. That's a lot of work, but it removes the risk of future surface impoundment failure, so it takes that off the table.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn it over to Representative Smith for a question. Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Being new to the committee, thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Just a basic question, I guess. is it the breakdown when you bring coal in and you use it to produce electricity? Is it the breakdown of that coal that causes it to be hazardous when it's discharged into the water, or the dust in the atmosphere?
I'll let Aaron address that.
Yeah, thank you. So when we combust coal, the carbon and the combustible parts are consumed. What's left is the inorganics that cannot be burned. And to be clear, coal ash was determined by EPA after about 20 years of study that it is not a hazardous waste. It is a solid waste, and that is how both the federal and the Georgia EPD rule regulates it. So what's left is merely the concentration of what can't be burned after the combustion process.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Hogan?
On Plant McManus in Glenn County, did we have a problem with Hurricane Irma and it dumping water into out of the coal ash pond into the river?
Thank you for the question. No is the short answer to that. We've been closing Plant McManus for about 3 years. We should have been completed with that construction due to the 2 hurricanes that came through and filled the pond back up. We've had to pause excavation of that pond and treat that water. This year, we should near completion of removing the final ash from that pond. The pond integrity remained intact, and the additional preventive measures ahead of both hurricanes allowed that pond to stay intact.
So there was no water out of the ash pond that went into the river?
Not out of the normal discharge.
Okay, thank you.
The integrity of the pond was maintained.
I'm going to try to get these in order. Chairman Tanner, I believe that is you, and let me get you on.
You got me. This is just a comment I want to make mainly to the committee. I've had the pleasure of serving under Chairman Smith for 7 years, and for the new members who don't know Lauren Curry with the department, you need to get to know her because she's a great resource for us. I call on her very often, so she's an asset to you, Director, and for the new members who don't know Lauren, a lot of these questions that'll come up and concerns that'll come up with both legislations and through constituent issues, she's a good resource for us to utilize.
All right, I believe it's Representative Buckner. I think that's your microphone. Well, make sure I got it on. Hold on. All right, try it now. Yeah, well, that works too. Will?
Take the one mic over and see.
Try yours again one more time. It ain't working still. Sorry.
Okay, time's up.
Try the one next to you. Yeah. Why is it not working? Well, just talk loud. That'll be fine.
I am just curious, in the deep water process of ash ponds, some of the ash is removed from the pond and put into landfills. Some is left in the pond and covered over, and some, there's some conversation about some going to landfills and run offline. What is the criteria for where that ash goes, whether it stays in place or goes to a live landfill?
I'll address that from the matter of our plans. The majority, we have about 90 million tons of ash at all of our facilities. The vast majority of that ash will remain on Georgia Power sites. A smaller amount, 10% or less, may go to off-site permitted line landfills approved by EPD to accept that ash. Does that answer your question?
Why does some get to stay and some go to live?
How do we determine how to close the ponds? Each of them are site specific. In some cases, in all cases, the ponds that were closest to the pond, we elected to remove. That allows us to provide the greatest amount of groundwater protection closest to the rivers as well. The ponds that are further away allows us to implement additional engineered methods to ensure that those closures are done properly and protective for the long term. So I'm happy to follow up on specifics and plant by plant specifics, but we gained a lot of insight from third parties and analysis of engineers and geologists to come to those decisions for each and every pond.
Thank you, Representative Buckner. I know we have a list of questions, and I apologize, but we really are going to have to get out of here. So for those of you who do have questions, I would encourage you to either follow up with Director Dunn or Lauren Curry with EPD, or follow up with our partner, with the folks over here on the wall with Oglethorpe, MEAG, or Georgia Power. Or you can, if you're a member of the committee, feel free to submit a question to Chairlady Smith or myself, and we'll be happy to coordinate with you to make sure we get your questions or concerns answered. So we appreciate all of you being here. I'm going to turn it over to the Chairlady real quick for some final comments.
So first of all, thanks to our presenters. These updates are extremely important. And for the viewing, listening public, these are all archived. You can go to our websites and find them. It's a very complicated subject matter, and our committee members and myself have felt it extremely important that this information get out to the public. So thank you again for your attendance. Please remember our logistics. Our House and Senate members need to leave first if our audience will stay put, but those blocking the door will definitely have to move out to give them a chance to leave. And thank you for your attention and for coming today. We're adjourned.